Okay, so we've got our mesh, kind of base mesh, and now we want to look at how do we create the footprints for the cliffs. Before we do that, I just want to go in and address a couple of little things here. So right now we can see that there are some pretty small isolated pieces of geometry, probably smaller than I really want for the next part of my operation. So in order to ensure that we get sort of like a coarser representation of the terrain, we can just go up to the convert height field and switch the density to 0.5. And you're going to see that we're going to get these larger parts of the terrain, maybe even 0.3. And we can always increase the resolution later if we choose. We can also go to the group and we can modify the masking, so we can make it more or less aggressive here. And I'm going to make it a bit less aggressive, so we just keep a bit more overall larger portions of the terrain. So let's go ahead with that. Mask set to less than 0.05 and the density set to 0.3. So now we're in a good place to go ahead and start thinking about the next step, which is the footprints. And the way that we're going to think about footprints is we're going to be thinking about some of the processes that actually happen that to sort of define how rocks behave in nature. So we're thinking about introducing some kind of faults and cracks that are going to describe the larger forms of our terrain. So the first thing I'm going to do is introduce you guys to a node. Maybe you're familiar with it, maybe you're new to Houdini if you've never seen it before. It's the Voronoi fracture. So Voronoi is a very useful kind of tool in computer graphics, which allows us to describe kind of a triangulation pattern across some geometry. So in order for this Voronoi fracture to kind of give us something useful off the bat, maybe actually let's go to the side for 1 second and just look at what the Voronoi gives us by itself. So we've got this grid, and let's say that there's no subdivisions on it anymore. If we go ahead and we scatter, then we can scatter, say, 5 points, and then we can put down a Voronoi fracture node on the grid, and then we can wire the points into the right, and you can see that we're going to get this kind of pattern. And if we change the number of points, we're going to get more of these splits, and if we decrease them, we'll have less. And obviously, if we change the seed, we're going to get different placement of these lines, of these triangles that get created, these polygons. Okay. So that's basically it. It's very simple. It just allows us to create some kind of triangulation patterns, some kind of polygonal patterns across a piece of geometry. Just for interest, if we were to subdivide the grid rather than scattering points across it, so we go ahead and subdivide it twice, and then we're going to actually remove everything except the points from this grid. So we now just have a grid of points and fracture by these. You can see that we're actually just going to get a grid again from it. And if we go ahead and add a little point jitter, you can see we can start to sort of pull the shape away from that grid. And it allows you to create some kind of interesting mix between organic or more kind of architectural shapes. So definitely a very useful tool. And we're going to be using that here to introduce some kind of cliff-like faults and cuts. But you can see that we're getting this kind of weird stretching by default because we're not dealing with a flat surface. And actually all we need to do to deal with that is just turn off the create interior surfaces. Okay, so now we can't actually see anything at all. So in order to make sure that we can see those cracks coming through, I'm just going to go ahead and add a slight smooth operation after the fracture. And the smooth operation is also going to need to have the constrained boundary turned off. And now we can start to see where these faults are getting introduced. We're also getting all this kind of warping everywhere else on the terrain, which is not exactly what we want. But for now, we only really care about the kind of visibility of these cracks. That's why we turned on the smoothing. So I'm going to turn the filter quality down and decrease the strength so we can just get a little bit of this coming through. And then as we increase the count here, we can see we're introducing more of these slashes and cuts to the terrain. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the sort of the wireframe there. And I'm also going to turn off the UV display to make this come through even more, maybe even turn off the lighting. There we go. So now we can really see where these faults are getting introduced. And it's really cool and all, but as we increase the number, you can see we do start to get a kind of regular pattern starting to emerge, which is determined by just the spacing of the points. And this might work for a sort of more stylized example, but it's also quite recognizable as a Voronoi pattern. And you know, your more seasoned sort of 3D artists or you know, anyone who's particularly observant playing a game is going to notice that this feels a little bit off. So we can do some things to make this pattern less apparent. and also to kind of push ourselves more to mimicking sort of like the shapes that would actually occur in nature. And one of the things that you tend to see, or that I would like to see here, is these kind of horizontal cuts or markings, kind of layers in the rock. And I want these to be coming through here. So what I can do, and this is just a very simple little hack, we can just put down a transform. And this transform, we're going to do it before the Voronoi fracture, for the scatter. And I'm going to set the scale in the in the y-axis, that's the up axis, I'm going to set to 100. Okay, well this is useless and not at all what we want. But now see what happens if after the Voronoi fracture, before the smooth, we do the opposite operation. So we plug in the transform and we say 0.01 on the vertical scale. And now we start to see that we're getting these kinds of interesting layer kind of appearance. But the benefit of doing it this way is you actually still do get some of that irregularity from the Voronoi pattern. So it's not just like we're cutting things horizontally. It's like we're doing some fracturing, but with a bias that is described by the amount of stretch that we've created here. Now I'm going to tie the two parameters together, so the after scale and the before scale. So we're going to say, we're going to copy this parameter. This is a cool feature in Houdini. And then on the shrink sort of back down transform after the fracture, I'm going to say 1 divided by paste relative references. Okay, and this is just so that every time we set this vertical scale, we don't then have to go and correct. We don't have to do it twice. We only do it once. And you see that if we play with this height, we can see when we set it to 10 or 5, or the closer we get to 1, really, the closer we're going to get to our original result. And then the more that we increase this, the more we're going to be biasing the fracturing to create this kind of horizontal layering appearance. And if we go ahead and set this to say 10, and quite like this, and then the scatter, we could decrease the overall number down to maybe 50, maybe even 25. And I feel like this is now a pretty nice base for us to go in and start thinking about some other kinds of fracturing. And it gives you these large forms that we really want to see that you can recognize in nature.